Welcome to YDL's webinar on how to make between 15 and 30% per annum in hard currency in the United States of America through our Property Partner Program. I'm Anton de Leeuw of YDL, and my co-presenter today is Dion van Druten. Dion, would you like just to say a word of welcome?
Yeah, hi everyone. From a rather chilly Atlanta, leaving South Africa on my last trip when it was 29 degrees down to a chilly 7 degrees, although it's a nice respite from the very hot summer that we had here just literally 2 months ago. I'm sure we're going to have fun today.
Thank you. Just looking at our agenda for the day, as we said, it's all about how we can make these returns of 15 to 30% through our program, and we'll take you through quite a bit of detail. Obviously, keep in mind that the nature of a webinar is such that we can't get into overly technical things like detailed tax or structure. But if any of you are interested in getting more information, we can talk at any point after the webinar and maybe set up a face-to-face meeting. So the agenda is who is YDL, why are investors going offshore, then we'll focus on why Atlanta in the USA in particular, some of the demographics, etc. Then we'll go into the flipping model, and we will give an indication of the capital required, in other words, the investment required by an investor in this particular program, as well as the expected returns. And then we'll show you a number of actual examples of properties that are on the go at the moment. But before we go into who's YDL, we thought it's important perhaps right up front just to define what we mean by the word flipping, which you'll hear quite a bit during this particular presentation. It's a word used by the Americans in the property market to, in essence, denote the buying and selling of property for capital gain. And in our particular instance, looking at the slide in front of you, it is where we buy a property as low as possible, and we try and buy directly from the source, or as close to the ground floor as we possibly can. We'll come back to that. And then we add significant value by rehabbing. Now that's another American term. It stands for rehabilitation. So it's the same as renovation here, but we do more than we would typically do in South Africa. And then we sell as quickly as we can in a rising market. And the Atlanta market is very, very hot, as you'll see at the moment. And that's one of the key reasons why we are in Atlanta compared to South Africa at the moment. So we started out as a property investment educationist at the time with Financial Mail and Nedbank, who supported us for many, many years, and we helped thousands through our seminars and consulting sessions, etc., to invest an estimated 1.5 billion rand plus in property. But over the last couple of years, we've focused solely on the so-called distressed market in South Africa, and we've become niche experts, if you will, in that particular space. And we are furthermore authorized financial or a authorized financial services provider, and our mission is to bring top quality, solid and profitable international and local property investment opportunities to investors. So from that point of view, as I alluded to earlier, we're now doing in the United States what we've successfully been doing in South Africa for the last 10 years. So why are investors going offshore? I think the one key issue is perhaps the fact that many investors have concerns about having the majority of their investments in one country, in South Africa. In other words, all their eggs in one basket. And the other side of that coin is the desire by many who may or may not have concerns about South Africa simply to have returns in hard currency, because I understand the benefit of that. I understand that the rand will probably over the medium to longer term continue to weaken, and therefore it's some would even go as far as saying it's almost an obligation towards one's family to have some of one's wealth in hard currency. So when we look at the country risk or political risk issue, Moody's, for example, rates South African debt at Baa1, which is the third lowest investment grade, and on par with Thailand and Russia. And S&P downgraded South Africa in October last year to BBB, which is its second lowest investment grade. So there are clearly issues. And then it was quite interesting. We looked at Clem Santer's scenarios, and he talks about the so-called tipping point. Now, he earlier spoke about a tipping point in our history as well, which was around the time that the AWB stormed the World Trade Center in Kempton Park. We got through that, and we're now a true democracy, as we all know. But he's now talking about the second tipping point, where he's giving a probability of around 50% that we'll be in the so-called Premier League, a soccer analogy, as you can see, but quite worryingly, also a 50% probability that we will drop down into the so-called second division, or even become a failed state. Now, what does the Premier League scenario mean? The major flag that they use is that we're currently 53rd out of 59 countries in the World Competitiveness Index, and they say that we need to move back into the middle 30s in order to be in the Premier League. And then we'll have good growth in South Africa, the economy would hum along, etc., etc. If, however, we drop down to the second division, that would be a situation where uncertainty would continue. The best description I saw is probably we'll be peaceful but poor, and we'll slide into the second division with a bulk of third world economies. Now, what is worrying is that a year ago, Clem Santer gave a 40% probability for us to slide down into the second division. That probability has recently been downgraded, if you will, to 25%. If you look at the failed state scenario, where we would join the likes of Syria, Afghanistan, and Somalia, a year ago they gave that a probability of 10%. That is now up to a very worrying 25%. So I think in summary, this is all about your own view about the country risk. Do you put all your eggs in one basket, or do you diversify into a hard currency? And that's a very personal decision, and obviously each of us would have to make up our own minds on this. But these scenarios, I think, are very very instructive in this debate. And when we look at the performance of the rand, it's declined for 3 years in a row. It's the worst performing major currency over the last 3 years. It's depreciated significantly this year, and over 30% since the start of 2011. And although some are predicting that the rand's misery is nearing its end, most economists agree that the rand will weaken against the dollar over the medium to long term. We also looked recently at the Bloomberg consensus forecast, and that's the view. I had a look yesterday at Standard Bank's prediction for the end of the year, which is that there will be quite they feel a wide trading range, but that by year end the rand will be around 10. The point here being that if these economists are right, you could substantially increase your wealth by putting your money into dollar-based investments compared to simply keeping it in rands. And it's, of course, all about asset allocation. What percentage of your wealth do you put into a hard currency? And then if we look at the performance of the rand over a 10-year period, you will see that at one point it was around about the 6th level or so, and today, as we said, by the end of the year, will be around about 10 or so probably. So the point is, should this trend continue, it does make sense to put money into hard currency, and then not to worry about short-term fluctuations in the exchange rate. It's actually then about building over the medium to long term wealth in a true global sense, and keeping that money offshore until you tactically decide to bring the money back or not. So why the United States of America? I think we all know this story very well, so we'll keep this part very short. It's all about the subprime crisis, as you know, that caused house prices to plummet. That in turn caused waves of foreclosures, and as a result of that, opportunities have been abounding, and to some extent still do. It's been quite a number of years now since the house prices plummeted. So a lot of these markets, including Atlanta, have actually turned. Atlanta has already grown over 18% year on year. But despite that, there are still foreclosures coming through the system, and therefore there's still opportunities for YDL investors. For interest, the Americans talk about mortgages or bonds or home loans, as we know it, being underwater. And we thought we'd just show you the next two slides for interest, as I said, simply to show where their market is at the moment in terms of the number of properties or percentage of properties being underwater or not. So if you look at distressed homes with the so-called equity lifeline, that is where homes are currently in the foreclosure process, but they've just moved from so-called negative equity into positive equity. Negative equity simply means that the homeowner would be owing more to the bank than what the property is worth. And you'll see that is 24% of all home loans at the moment. But if you look at the number of homes that are seriously underwater, that is defined as homeowners owing at least 25% more than their home is worth, which I should maybe repeat because that's something that we're not used to typically in South Africa. So that's where homeowners owe at least 25% more than their home is worth. That number today is still a staggering 10.7 million homes nationwide, or 23% of all homes with a mortgage. So that simply shows the depth of the problem in the United States still, and therefore the fact that there's still opportunities to buy properties at good, solid prices where there's sufficient fat, as it were, in the deal for us to allow us to buy low and sell, as we said earlier, as quickly as possible in a rising market. And some expert opinions, Donald Trump and Warren Buffett, with Warren Buffett making the point that single-family homes, which are really just our residential homes as we know them, are very attractive at the moment. And if he had a way of buying a couple of 100,000 of these homes, he would load up on them. And we see that a lot of the American hedge funds probably followed his advice and started doing exactly that. And they've, interestingly enough, become our greatest competition in Atlanta. And then in terms of why Atlanta, Dion will run us through the next couple of slides to at least give our perspective and some of the research that we did on why we're focusing in Atlanta.
Great, thanks, Anton. For those of you who are not entirely familiar with where Atlanta is within the United States context, you can see in the southeastern part of the U.S. You have the state of Georgia. Atlanta is situated almost in the middle of Georgia, the state of Georgia. I find this slide particularly interesting. Really what it's showing is the three major distribution hubs in America, the northern one being Chicago, the one in the Midwest being the area surrounding Dallas, and then the one in the southeast of the United States being Atlanta. what is important about this slide is I guess using an analogy that South Africans would be familiar with. What Joburg is, I guess you could say, to sub-Saharan Africa, so is Atlanta to the entire sort of southeastern part of the United States, which makes it a very viable place for us to be right now. If one just looks at, zooms in slightly to that southeastern part of the U.S., one of the reasons we chose Atlanta, after having spent some time investigating various centers around the United States, was specifically because of the Atlanta economy, and also because of what happened with the housing market, specifically in Atlanta, Georgia. What I find quite fascinating is that if one looks at the southeastern part of the United States, there's 11 or 12 states that makes up that sector of the U.S. And if one were to take the collective economy of those 11 states, they would make up the world's 5th largest economy, which is quite staggering when you consider that it's only one portion of the United States itself. The population growth within Atlanta is quite staggering. 20 years ago, Atlanta was a city of little more than 1 million people, and today Atlanta itself has got just under 6 million people, and this area makes up 25% of the nation's population. This greater southeastern area, that is. Having spent some time here in Atlanta, it's quite fascinating when you speak to most locals. One of the first topics of conversations that come up is, where did you grow up? Which is quite interesting. In South Africa, we tend to think of Americans as kind of growing up in one place and staying. I recall seeing at one point a statistic that said that almost half of all Americans grow up and live in the same state throughout their lives, and that's very different nowadays. Atlanta, for example, I think the statistic is 5 out of every 6 people that you meet in Atlanta didn't in fact grow up in the city. So that's a very interesting dynamic for us as investors, and it really points to the fact that Atlanta is a very fast-growing hub within the American context. It's touted to create 23 million jobs forecasted for this region over the next 20 years. And of course, as most of you would probably know, the Atlanta International Airport is the busiest airport in the world, carrying 95 million passengers a year. And another, very I would say fortuitous reason, I guess, and it's not the reason we chose Atlanta, but a fortuitous reason for being here is that there's a direct flight between Johannesburg and Atlanta on Delta Airlines, which makes it very convenient for us as YDL to be managing our business here.
And Dion, on that point, if I may say, I think it's great as well from the point of view of investors, and we invite investors as well to come over to Atlanta, join us there on the ground, drive around with us for a couple of days, have a look at the properties we're busy with, the type of areas we're buying in, because that will, in our experience, certainly give investors a great sort of taste and feel for the underlying asset class, and the fact that the market is so hot and moving, and what's happening on the ground. So it's an open invite.
Yes, we would absolutely love investors to join us. Just a quick scenario of why Atlanta is for us a very viable investment location. It's ranked 3rd in the U.S. Fortune 500 companies headquarters in the United States. There are many logos there that you would recognize. My particular favorite is Home Depot. Being a renovator at heart, it's like Builders Warehouse on steroids. I absolutely love that store. Then other very large blue chip organizations, Coca-Cola, obviously Delta Airlines. That's just another slide of those companies. Sorry, I've jumped ahead one slide there. Let's just have a look. There we go. Another reason we're in Atlanta is the low cost of living. Now, if one looks at that slide, you'll notice that the cost of living index, the US average being 100, you'll see that Atlanta is well below that. And if one compares that to living in other major centers in the US, Atlanta being one of them, as we saw earlier from the distribution hub perspective, the cost of living index is significantly cheaper, which obviously from a local perspective means one can understand why so many people like the idea of moving to Atlanta to work and to live. The cost of doing business index, if one looks at this slide, is also very important. One reads almost daily in the newspapers here of companies that are either relocating to Atlanta to open their headquarters, or companies that are opening up branches in Atlanta. And the reason for that is quite simple, is Atlanta, or should I say the state of Georgia, has a very friendly tax regime. They have a lot of tax incentives specifically for small to medium-sized enterprises, and it is for the local population a very viable a destination to set up their business, simply because the cost of doing business here is one of the lowest in the United States, actually.
Dion, can I sorry, just say, whilst we're still on Atlanta, just to mention to webinar attendees that they can of course ask questions via the questions section on their webinar panels. And I see there's a question here from an attendee asking in which areas we invest and why, and we will come to that when we deal with the real life examples that we'll share a little bit later.
Great, yes, and that relates obviously to understanding the city. This is just a newspaper headline that I picked up, I think on my last trip, where it really talks about two things that really supports 120% why we are here in the city. First, Atlanta ranks high for home affordability. I mean, you know, that backs up what I was saying a moment ago in terms of why people are coming here. For example, a typical 3-bedroom, 2-bathroomed home in Atlanta, in a very decent middle income suburb, would probably cost you in the region of $250,000, which to South Africans, simply because of the exchange rate, might sound like a lot of money. But to your average American moving their way up the property ladder, a young couple for argument's sake, $250,000 is very affordable, particularly when you consider that they're buying houses at 4% mortgage rates over 30 years. So their bond repayments are significantly lower than what we would be used to. By comparison, if that same couple were, for example, to buy a house in any other big hub, let's call it Dallas or Chicago or whatever, in a similar kind of suburb and the location to the city center, they'd be paying not $200,000 to $250,000, but probably $350,000, $400,000, even $500,000 for a very similar home. Housing starts up by 15%. The other slide, which is very important, I read recently that Atlanta, New York, and I think it was Chicago, in fact, are leading the new housing industry within, or the construction industry within America. Now that's very important, because what that means is they've realized that there are certain areas where the housing supply historically, or should I say over the last 4 or 5 years, has built up, simply because the builders over the last 5-6 years have been very inactive, and that was as a result of the property slump. Suddenly one sees all over Atlanta new building activity, and for us this is certainly not a threat. It vindicates what we're doing, number one. But number two, it's very exciting because what it means is there are a lot of people looking for accommodation. From our perspective, beautifully renovated homes as opposed to new homes is a very viable option for many, many people because, of course, we're focusing, as we'll get to later, in the areas closer to the city where there isn't land to build new homes, but people want to move. So this is very exciting for us to be in Atlanta where we've got this kind of activity.
Dion, there's a question here about why is the demand in Atlanta so high? I suppose that relates to the question that the comment you made earlier that the Atlanta market is so hot. And in fact, just going to go back to the previous slide, that article that Dion referred to. In essence, and obviously it's a multi-layered answer, but in essence, as you as property investors would realize, it's all about property supply and demand in a particular market. And on the supply side, supply has become severely constricted simply because house prices plummeted. There was a crash. So you found that properties were sold through the foreclosure process for 50% of the cost of constructing exactly the same house. So obviously it then became much cheaper to buy an existing house compared to building a new house, and therefore developers fled the market in droves, and many of them became bankrupt. So on the supply side, constricted supply. On the demand side, many different factors, but again, if you look at this particular slide, the fact that median household income is 40% more than the median priced home. That's an incredibly important statistic from our point of view. And it really means, as Dion alluded to, that properties are very affordable to your average home buyer. And secondly, I think personally, is the fact that the net migration, in other words, the population growth in Atlanta is incredibly strong, and therefore you have high demand because of that in a very affordable city. Because at the end of the day, if you look at what we're busy doing, flipping properties, one of the key risks, I suppose, is who will we sell to, and will they have sufficient money to buy? And this is why this is so important, that we sell to, in the areas you'll see later, where we're buying to typically yuppies, typically twin income families with good jobs that can quite easily afford a mortgage because of this. So I hope that at least gave a little bit of an answer to that question.
Interestingly, I often get asked, well, if there was this massive slump in America, and people were so burnt by the market, how come people are why is the demand so high? Why are people wanting to buy houses? That's not really the reality. Is that people are the supply is so short, and because the supply is so short, there are people wanting to work their way up the property ladder and have been wanting to do that for the last 5-6 years. The supply just hasn't been, it hasn't been there. So you've got a situation now where I'm on the road almost every day looking at properties, buying properties, and the realtors here, the estate agents that I meet, are all lamenting the fact that they just have got no inventory. There's just absolutely no inventory. So that for us is great because it means if we can find houses and build renovate houses in the right areas, the demand is there because the supply is so small, put it that way. So in summary then, why are we flipping in Atlanta? Well, it's quite simple. The slowdown in the South African market is something Anton has spoken about, and why we're here. It's just such a bit of and viable should I say area for us to be doing flipping, to be doing buying, renovating and selling. We'll go wherever the profits are. We've looked at various locations around the world, and right now the United States is second to none in terms of the kinds of opportunities that are there to make money through astute property investing.
In fact, Dion, it's you know, it's a big statement to make, you know, I suppose, but to my mind personally, I think this is probably a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity in terms of how far the market's fallen. Well, maybe it's once in a lifetime for me, maybe twice in a lifetime for others. But it's really it's one of the most incredible opportunities that I've seen in my property investment career.
Yes, yes, and you know, we're really duplicating what we've been doing successfully in South Africa for the last 10 or so years. So it's not as though we're doing anything new. The principles of the kinds of investment opportunities that we brought to South Africans in the past 10 years is simply what we're now doing in the United States. The Atlanta market, it's very hot. We showed in the slides what we mean by that. The idea is that we can sell very quickly. Obviously, buying as low as possible, rehabbing and selling as quickly as possible is key to the success of this particular flip model, because time is money. Niche experts in Atlanta, what's critical, and it's something we've realized, is that unless you actually understand where you're playing extremely well, it's going to be very difficult to do what we're doing. In fact, I would say it's pretty much impossible to flip properties unless you're actually there. And we have set up a YDL. We've set up our business in Atlanta. We're busy growing our network all the time, and we're starting to understand the city better and better. Every day that I'm on the streets, I'm understanding the city more and more and more. We're obviously only buying in those areas that I've become very, very familiar with, and I now know, as well as, I guess I could say, I know some parts of Johannesburg. Although the distressed properties available there is declining, there's still more than sufficient. I think what people tend to forget is Atlanta alone is 6 million people. I mean, you know, when one looks at the greater Atlanta and the locations that we're working in, although it's the competition, I guess one could say, is in many ways far greater than, let's say, Johannesburg or Cape Town or Durban. There's so many more people, and there's so many more potential housing opportunities. And then, of course, the returns, looking at doing anything up to 30% return per annum.
So what's in it for you? We thought we'll just summarize key elements of the proposition, as it were. And the first one, obviously, are the excellent returns that we've been talking about. Transparency, vital to YDL. Our ethics are that we don't hide anything from investors. There are no layers of fees that aren't disclosed, or whatever the case might be. When you deal with us, you have an open book relationship, and that includes access to any details of any transaction, down to copies of invoices, if you want to. So transparency for us is the bedrock, actually, on which the business is built. Then, as Dion said earlier, leveraging YDL's flipping experience in South Africa, in Atlanta. So we've been doing this for 10 years plus. It's not new, it's part of our DNA, and we're simply doing it in different markets, as the property markets in different areas and countries obviously go up and down. So as we all know, they move in cycles, and these opportunities are typically easier to buy when you're in a contrarian space, in other words, where there are foreclosures in the market. But of course, we can do this in any market, actually, but at the moment it's just slightly easier, volumes are better, etc. For example, when you look at the pictures on this particular slide, the top left is a photograph of a property that we bought in that state. It was unfinished, no roof, no finishes whatsoever, in Bryanston in South Africa, and the bottom right is the finished product that we sold for 6.25 million. We have expert knowledge of Atlanta. Dion spoke about that as well. We've already been there with buy-to-let and other deals for the last 2.5 years, And it's one of the 8 golden rules of YDL that many of you that have come to our, or that in years past came to our events might recall. And this is the one that it's vital to become a niche expert. So we're living our philosophy as it were, and we find that this is one of the, in fact, it's probably the most important aspect that mitigates risk for an investor and for ourselves. Market intelligence that we've built up ourselves and through our networks, and I know that the fear of many people that we talk to is about the fact that they'll be investing in a foreign market and they don't have the local knowledge and they can be taken for a ride by unscrupulous operators, and all of that is true. I would have had exactly the same fears. The point here being is you're dealing with a South African company. You can pick up the phone, you can call us in South Africa, we can have a meeting, we can look at your investments, the growth and that sort of thing. But by the same token, we're not brokers. We'll come to that a little bit later as well. In other words, we don't have American operators doing deals and we just brokers selling it on to South Africans. We actually doing the deals ourselves directly in Atlanta, having set up a presence there. We provide a turnkey service. We literally do everything. The so-called sweat equity is really what we bring, as well as very deep intellectual property in terms of where to buy, the market, the various risks attached to the various processes, how to mitigate those, how to manage the processes, etc. And as you'll see on the slide, that service includes which structures to use, the management of all the legal processes, in other words, getting the properties bought, transferred, sold again, transferred to the buyers, all administration of the deals, including financial accounting, which would include full reconciliation of all the expenses, and obviously buying the properties and then renovating and selling them. I spoke about the direct purchasing model before. Just to pause there, the importance here is that, as we said earlier, we try and get in on the so-called ground floor. So if you imagine, let's say, a building with 20 stories, and that's price. So the higher up you go, the more you need to pay for a property. If you can obviously get in on the ground floor, you're going to buy the property for less, and therefore there's going to be more profit for everyone, YDL included. So that's very, very important as an element of the model. And where we can't, we try and get in on the first or the second floor, where brokers typically get in, I suppose, difficult to say, sort of on the 5th, 6th floor maybe, or even higher, because they're on selling someone else's properties where they've actually locked in their own profit to make it worth their while. So this is a vital point, which obviously has come at quite a cost for YDL, because we've had to invest hundreds of thousands of rands in setting up shop in Atlanta and getting to know the market. The direct presence we spoke about. That's just a picture of Dion on a construction site with his hard hat. Then scale, very significant. We've secured finance for our flip deals. There's slides a little bit later where we'll go into a little bit more detail. But in essence, it means that you can do about 2.5 times the number of deals that you otherwise would have been able to do. And that means your returns are increased, and you don't have to put up any personal surety. So your personal wealth is not compromised in any way, shape, or form. Handpicked partners, it's very, very important for us, and we've spent a lot of time to make sure that we deal with the right partners, right through from accountants, lawyers, to the so-called rehab teams on the ground. Risk management links right back to the golden rule about having become niche experts. So I think we've spoken about that at length already. And then for those of you that are perhaps concerned about the United States economy and where it's going to go, and in particular the very high debt levels and the QE or quantitative easing policy at the moment, I suppose from that point of view, one of the benefits of this flipping model is that we, as far as property goes at least, we're in and out very quickly. So deals would typically take somewhere between 4 and 8 months. So from that point of view, arguably one would, if should something go wrong in the American economy, that would obviously have to filter down into the Atlanta property market. One would arguably see the corner coming, and one would hopefully be able to take appropriate measures to mitigate its effect. So it's not a long-term commitment to the United States economy. It's actually very quick in and out. And then crucial as well, if YDL does not perform, it does not earn. So we're truly rowing in the same direction. And the bottom line there is that we earn a percentage of the net profit. That's it. No hidden fees, nothing else. So the higher the profit, the more you'll make, and the more YDL would make. Now, in terms of how the flipping model works, once again, it's, as we said, buy low from the source if we can, add value through rehabbing, and often we'll add a bathroom or a bedroom or both, and then sell as quickly as we can. Now, a crucial question, and I see this came up a little bit earlier as well from one of the attendees, is how much money do I need to put in? Now, from a South African perspective, it is a lot of money. We're talking, in order to do a deal, somewhere between about 800,000 Rand to about R1 million. There's one deal at the moment to the east of Atlanta that we're looking at where the investor would have to put in probably about 650,000 Rand or so in order to do the deal. If the amount of money or capital that's got to be injected is a concern, maybe from an asset allocation point of view, please give us a ring or contact us via email. Our details will be shown at the end of this webinar, so that we can work with you to find ways, and there are ways in which you can still join the program even for a lesser amount. So in summary, as we said, typically between $80,000 to $100,000 for a profit per annum of about $15,000 to $30,000, which is obviously the 15 to 30% that we've been talking about. In terms of the hard money finance that we managed to secure, just to put that in sharp focus, in essence it means that your investment is smaller and you can more than double the returns that you otherwise would have made had you bought in cash. So it's a significant advantage for investors. So if you look at the without gearing column, let's assume, as purely an example, that you need $250,000 to do a particular deal, and you do it in cash, and let's say you make $10,000 over a 6-month period. In other words, we buy the property, renovate or rehab, and sell it, and transfer happens to the buyer all within 6 months. Your return then over 6 months would be $10,000 over the $250,000 that you put in, therefore 4%. And if you take the proceeds of that sale and you do a deal with the same return, and you do that within 6 months, your return would obviously then be 8%. So it's 2 deals in a year. If you look at those green arrows, you will see that with gearing, you only have to put in, let's say, around $100,000, so it's much more affordable. And if you then still make $10,000, your return would therefore be 10% over 6 months. And if you annualize that, your return would be 20%. So the bottom line is, instead of putting in $250,000, you only have to put in $100,000, and your return would more than double, in this instance from 8% to about 20%. And also, to make a further point about gearing, which is really that it means more deals and more absolute profit. In other words, more money in your hands. Let's say an investor committed 5 million rands to this program, and we use the same assumptions as before. So it's $250,000 per deal should you buy cash. You would therefore be able to do 2 deals in a year. Sorry, in 6 months, 4 deals in a year. And again, if your profit is $10,000 per deal, doing 4 deals means that you'll make $40,000 in that year. But with gearing, because you only have to put in $100,000 you'd be able to do 5 deals with your 500,000 investment over a 6-month period, therefore 10 deals over a 12-month period. And again, that is static. If you make $10,000 per deal, 10 times $10,000 is therefore 100,000. So in summary, instead of putting in $250,000, you only have to put in $100,000 or less. As I said, we can talk to you offline. But in this example, your absolute return, the money in your back pocket before tax, of course, would increase from $40,000 to $100,000. I just want to see if there are questions here, because it was a bit of a technical section. No questions. All right, so either everyone understands this, or no one understands and would want to ask a question. All right, but let's assume that the concept has been put across. On that basis, what is our structure? And there was a question earlier about structure. Now, once again, we can't, in a webinar with our limited time, delve into any detail, but in essence, each property investment will have its own LLC, and an LLC simply stands for Limited Liability Company, very similar to South African closed corporations, I guess. Very easy to set up, very convenient, and quite cost effective as well. And they're also so-called pass-through entities. Their particular tax benefits, once again, as I said, we can talk offline about that. But in terms of the profit distribution, for our intellectual property and sweat equity, the turnkey service, all of those things that I mentioned earlier, the investor puts in the capital, YDL puts in its intellectual property and sweat equity, and all the investment that is made in Atlanta over the years, etc. And we then share the net profits, and that's quite important, the net profits after every single cost has been accounted for on a 50-50 basis. Now, it's very important that when you look at the 15 to 30% returns that we talk about, those are estimated investor returns after YDL has taken its share of the net profit. And the beauty of this model, and the reason why our existing investors love this model, is simply the fact that it's such a purist model. As we said earlier, we are totally incentivized to do the best possible deal for an investor. So in other words, buy as low as we can, rehab as best as we can, and sell the property for as much as we possibly can, because all of us will be making more from that particular deal. Now we're going to look at 3 real-life examples, which will also answer the question that was posed earlier about why, not why we buy in Atlanta, but rather where in Atlanta we buy and why.
Okay, we were sent this slide just shortly before the webinar by a contact that we have here in the US, who thought that it would be interesting for us to see it. And what it does really is it uses a heat map to show where the highest areas of population growth have been within the Atlanta metro area. And it just so happens that a lot of the work that we're currently doing on the flip model is very aligned to this. Now, we didn't, obviously with hindsight one can say that's why we are there, but again, it's nice to see that we are in the right kinds of areas where the supply is not that great, and of course where the population is growing.
So in essence, sorry, Dion, I'm just going to go back there quickly. The areas that aren't colored, we just took out the coloring, are the areas actually of the highest population growth from the year 2000 to 2010 in Atlanta, and that is slap bang where we're currently operating, as Dion said.
Yeah. And I guess if one were to zoom in slightly, one can see from this slide what we're talking about. What this is if we just go back a slide, what this shows is Atlanta. You can see the Atlanta downtown in the middle there. You've got two major motorways that dissect Atlanta, north to south and east to west, and we're essentially operating. Well, it's essentially, but currently a lot of the area that we're working in is to be found to the east and slightly to the sort of north and a little bit to the south of the east of the city. And if one looks at the geographically that area from, let's say, where it says Atlanta to the highway on the side there, which is the I-285, that is not dissimilar, I guess one could say, in distance to, let's call it Johannesburg CBD, to, let's say, the N3 just at Four Ways. So that just gives you a kind of a context for the area. So although we're only operating in what by Atlanta standards is a relatively small geographic area, for now that is, we'll look wherever we can find properties, we'll look, and as long as the fundamental support buying and selling in that area. But currently we're in an area that is probably as big as the entire Johannesburg northern suburbs. So it's not an insignificant area in terms of geographic size, but in terms of the overall geography of Atlanta, it's still fairly niched and fairly small. The reason we are here is quite simple, is in America there's a very strong trend towards inner city living. You'll find in most of the major most of the major cities in America, simply because of the congestion and the traffic problems that one experiences, there's a strong demand for housing closer to places of work. And of course Atlanta downtown and Atlanta midtown, which is just to the north there of Atlanta, are two of the high employment areas within the city. So you have a scenario where young people, I guess you could call them your yuppies, people with either very small kids or no kids, are wanting to live, work and play, I guess you could say, close to the center, and they're prepared to pay a slight premium to live there. So typically where you've got your sort of your older houses, your houses with lots of character, it's often called areas of gentrification, if you want. This is the areas that these people like to move into. This is an example of one particular investment where we bought a house in one of these areas. We do a very thorough due diligence on every property that we buy. So we'll go in on Google. Once we've identified the property, we'll locate it. We'll show how it works in relation to the city. You can see just next door to our house here is a rather large lot of 4 or 5 houses that was purchased by a developer. And of course, at first sight, when we became aware of this during our due diligence, before we'd actually signed the contract, if you like, or put our money down, we were kind of quite concerned that this would be a negative. What we realized very quickly after having spoken to the locals within the area, this is seen very much as a positive, because what the developer is going to be putting up there is retail. So it's going to be coffee shops, a pharmacy, etc., etc. And you can imagine the kind of couple that are going to buy this house are probably going to have, 1.5 kids, and they're going to enjoy strolling to the coffee shop on a Saturday morning or Sunday morning with their, for their cup of coffee. So if one just moves on and looks at this particular house that we bought, a particularly pretty house, I'm sure you'll all agree. Reminds me of something out of the older areas of the East Rand. Nothing against the East Rand, but that's where I grew up, and I'm used to seeing these postage stamp type properties. But within the Atlanta context, this is an absolute gold mine. And the idea is we want to try and find the properties that have got built-in value, buy them as low as possible, and
as ugly as possible, Dion.
And as ugly as possible, and significantly renovate them. There you can see inside. I mean, when we bought it, it really is nothing to look at. Bearing in mind that once we renovate this house, in fact, this one is about 2/3 the way done. I think, Anton, on our next webinar, we must show all the after pictures. I think
Yes,
our
that'll be great.
investors and certainly the people that will attend would be staggered at the amount of work that we actually do. It's quite amazing at the speed at which our guys work. There you can just see the bedrooms and bathrooms. I love these because the uglier the better, because what it means is that a lot of people are going to be turned away, but people like me are going to absolutely love these because right location, right opportunity, you just need to know what to do with the property. There's just some more pictures. You can see this house hasn't been upgraded probably for 30 or 40 years. Most of the houses that we're buying in this area are houses that were built in the 20s, 30s, 40s. And they have quite a lot of charm, I guess you could say. I mean, I very often get asked the question, do you buy wooden houses or brick houses? Now, it really doesn't matter because at the end of the day, you buy what's there. The American standard is very much wooden structures. This is actually, believe it or not, this is a wooden framed house with a brick cladding. Many people think, oh, it's a brick house, fantastic. It's not really a brick house. It just has a one-skin brick on the outside, which was very popular and is in fact coming back, interestingly enough. People like the idea of brick cladding. So that's just to show the back where we would put on a third. We would increase the size of the third bedroom and we'd put a main bathroom en suite. So when we bought this house, it was in American lingo a 3-1, which really means it's a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroomed house. And we'll be renovating it into a 3-bedroomed, 2-bathroomed house, and we'll be increasing the squares, the footprint of the house, so that it competes very favorably to other houses in the area. Just to prove that we're in good company, that's the neighbor immediately to our left, and you can see the house just a little bit further down is the other adjoining neighbor, and in this particular street you'll find as you drive down the street maybe 20 or 30 or maybe at a push 40% of the houses have already been renovated, so there's still lots of opportunity. The trick is to find those houses and to buy them before anyone else can. What we then do is we do a very thorough due diligence. We go and we physically drive all the comps, which is really just short for comparables. What that means is we look within a specific location at what houses of a similar or almost identical nature are located and are either on the market or under contract, which means they've got offers on them, or have in fact sold over the last 8 to 12 months. And you can see within this specific location, the red dot denotes our property, and all the other blue exclamation marks, if you like, are all competitive houses or comparative houses. We then plot that within the area. We decide whether the area can support the kind of selling price that we're working towards, and we make our decision based on that. Just moving on. This is just an example to show the kind of quality that we would work towards. This is not dissimilar to the types of rehabs we do. As I say, it really is quite astounding when one considers what we inherit when we buy and what we end up with when we're finished. We keep probably the only thing we keep in the house are the floors. In this area, it's what they call your craftsman style house, and because they were built in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, they all have solid hardwood floors. Not dissimilar to, I suppose, the areas in and around the city of Johannesburg, but obviously this area has got a very different dynamic, where you would find the Oregon pine floors, that are so sought after in Joburg. Yeah, it's your solid oak flooring and different American woods, which make it very appealing to prospective, call it yuppie buyers. There's just another example of the kind of quality finish. And we don't just look at the inside of the house. We also pay attention to the landscaping. Obviously, curb appeal is very important. We often put decks at the back of the house. You can see there's a wooden deck, and that's just to give you an example of the kind and the style of finish that we'd be working towards. As part of the research process that we do, or the due diligence that we do, this is also on that that same property, where we'll look at the greater location and how it relates to the surrounding environment, if you like. We'll denote which areas are, and we just keep it very simple. You can see that we said good to very good, average, very good, and not good. And we'll just make sure that we are in the right location, because as with property, it doesn't matter where you are in the world. It's really all about location. In terms of the returns, this is typically the example of the property that we showed there. What we're doing is when we go in, we're saying, what can we sell this house at? So that's our kind of our starting point. And in this particular case, our confidence level is pretty high that we can sell at $265,000. We then work back and we say, well, what do we need to buy that property at? So this house, for example, we started bidding, I think about 110,000, and very often one ends up in what they call a bidding war, where there will be multiple bids on these horrible old houses, and we ended up buying this property for 130,000. In terms of the returns, it fit our model very nicely. You can see essentially we bought the property for 130,000. The total costs are 104,000 on this particular deal. Of that, 65,000 is the rehab cost or the renovation cost. A lot of investors are quite surprised when they see those numbers, and they say, wow, you're not just doing a lick of paint. Well, that 65,000 represents a complete transformation of the house. That is gutting the house completely and essentially bringing to market an almost new house, if you like. So the total cost of this project are 234,000. Because of the finance that we have secured in Atlanta, as Anton mentioned earlier, the investor capital required here is 87,000. It's not obviously the 234,000. And if one looks at when one has sold the property at 265 less your costs, the investor profit is 15,000 on the money that they've put in, and over a 7-month period, we're generally quite conservative in the time that we believe it will take to turn a property around. In this instance, I'm very confident that we'll do this particular one in less than 7 months, but if we do it in 7 months, the investor return on his capital would be 17%. Now, if one annualizes that, one comes to a figure of about 29%. And really what we mean by that is, obviously, the minute we've sold this property and we've released that capital, our job then is to find another one for our investor and get back into the market and start turning his capital for him. This is just another example. I'm going to go through this one fairly quickly because it's in a very similar area, as you can see, to the east of Atlanta. Another particularly ugly house. This one, I was, in fact, I went to Anton yesterday and I inspected the renovation here. It's a pity I didn't have time to put the pictures in, but I think at the next webinar we can show the updated pictures. It's looking quite spectacular right now. Don't be fooled by what you see there. It's a beautiful property now. Well, it's fast becoming a beautiful property. Again, here selling at 220,000. We bought here for 96,000. The investor's capital required was mid-80s, 85 odd thousand. Total cost being 192. And when one looks at the total costs over the sales price, the net return for the investor is $13,000, which represents a 16% return. Again, I think we've done this one over 6 months. I personally believe we're going to beat the 6 month timing on that. Where I think it is about 6 weeks into this, and I'd say we are 2/3 done with our renovation already, which is very exciting for us in terms of timing. And then a quick look at a third deal, again in a similar kind of area, to the east of the city center. This is a property where we're actually going up. In other words, we're going to be putting, this is currently what they call a 3-1, so it's a 3-bedroomed, a 2-bedroomed, 1-bathroomed house. what we're going to be doing to this one is we're going to be putting on a second floor. There's what's very nice is this has got a double garage. Very rare in this area to have off-street parking, number one, and if one has off-street parking, to have a double garage. So that will add tremendous value. Obviously, what you see there will change quite drastically. Sometimes we have properties full of furniture, and in this case, we've got this beautiful antique. Anton, maybe we'll find a buyer on Antiques Roadshow for $20,000 for this. Who knows?
Yeah, make as much as we're going to make for the investor on the deal.
Yeah. And this one is a slightly higher end property. We're looking at selling at about the $300,000 mark. You can see there. Here you can see the rehab we're doing. We bought it for $110,000, and in fact we're going to be spending just on the rehab alone. We're going to be spending $110,000. So we're spending exactly double what we bought it for. The investor capital required here is in the region of $100,000, and the profit here we are at this point reasonably confident that we'll do pretty well on this one over a 7-month period, returning 19% on the investor's capital over a 7-month period. Yeah, Anton, back to you. Yeah.
Thank you, Dion. Yeah, and I'm sure that more than adequately answers the question about where in Atlanta we buy and why. Yeah, so in summary, we're in Atlanta because the South African market has slowed down. We're simply not finding the type of value that we did even a year ago. In other words, the volumes of distressed properties have come down, and the prices have gone up quite dramatically. And as Dion said earlier, we will go where the profits are. And in this instance, we, based on a lot of research, selected the United States. We've been operating there now for about 2.5 years, so it's not a new entry for us. And we're simply doing there what we've been doing successfully in South Africa for the last 10 years. As we said numerous times, the Atlanta market is hot, so the right flips sell fast, also compared to the South African market, where in real terms our market is flat. The expected growth rate is flat, where it's very, very different there at the moment. So, a key question, I suppose, is how long the opportunity will last, and that is very difficult to say. My short answer to that question would be, every time we go into a new market with a new cycle, we know that it's going to run out at some point in time. It's crystal ball gazing. We can't really say how long it's going to last. So if you're interested, join the program and get involved. That's the single most important way to secure profits in a rising market. And then the point that we are niche experts in Atlanta, that is the number one aspect in terms of making sure that we manage your and our collective risk. And I suppose I spoke to this point already, that the distressed or the foreclosed or the number of foreclosed properties are declining, but it's there's still enough at the moment for us to do the deals, but rather get in sooner rather than later. And then, as we said, 15 to 30% returns in hard currency is possible. Just again a summary of the flipping model, which we're quite sure you understand well by now. And then we said we'll have our contact details. You could note those. It's probably best to email. I'm off to the United States as well very shortly, and we'll do our best to get back to you as quickly as possible with any further questions you might have, or if you're interested in investing. Please contact us, as we said, via email. So from my side, thank you very much for taking the time and the interest to listen to our webinar. We hope you found it insightful, fruitful, that there's a lot of interesting information for you to chew on, and we'd love to meet with you one-on-one to go into maybe a little bit more detail and to welcome you on board. Dion, was there anything further that you'd like to say in closing?
No, just thank you very much for being with us. It's evening your time, it's late morning my time, so I'm eager to get in my car. I've got about 8 or 10 properties that I have to go and inspect today, so want to get out there and do more deals. Yeah, thank you very much.